Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you are choosing to watch this set of videos. So welcome back to another installment of our environmental science course. So for this week, we are going to be kind of pivoting away from a little bit pivoting away from water and water resources as we were talking about in previous weeks. And this time we are going to dive into this idea of food and agriculture. This is a topic that's really important to me because I have a lot of opinions about feeding the world, and with populations increasing and the amount of food that's being produced or not being produced and whatnots, it's something that we really have to think about and consider, especially with climate change and how things are expected to modify with changing climates. But aside from all of that, there's other ways in which farming and agriculture can have impacts on local environments. And I grew up on and near a farm, so that's another reason I think why this topic is so important to me. What I do also want to mention is that this particular module just looks at agriculture, so like how we grow crops. If you have access to module 8.3, if you're in the spring 2024 course, that one I think is just online on the ebook version, and that goes into sustainable raising of animals. So instead of looking at crops, you're looking at animals. We could dive into that in a sense, but I'm just going to keep this one with agriculture, including things like soils and soil health. I did also kind of did a little mini interview of my dad, who is still farming, because I wanted to learn a bit more or kind of refresh my memory about ways that he has farmed either in the past or ways that he's kind of adjusted his farming to be better for the future. So with all of that and all of those announcements or those things, I do just also want to remind us that the end of the semester is very quickly approaching. So if you're behind on any work, please try to get working on some of your late work and getting caught up with any of that stuff. So the time has come. We're nearly there, my friends. So work on things that are not there, as well as, and I think maybe some of us have forgotten about, our field trip. Not one that we're taking together, right? Recall back, there's a whole field trip module on our Canvas page. So go in there, see what's available, get that done and get the write-up in so that you don't have to think about that later. Okie dokie. So all those things combined, here we are. Chapter 8.2, looking at sustainable farming and raising of our crops. So some key words that we need to identify first before kind of really diving headfirst. Identifying the difference between an industrial farm and more like a localized farm, or a sustainable farm, sustainable agriculture. So an industrial farm they're generally more monoculturistic, if that makes sense, which means that they only produce the same crops. They will only plant corn, they will only plant beans, they will only plant, almond trees or whatever. And these tend to be raised with synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. This is really, really good for producing a lot of food, right? And when we're trying to feed 8 billion people around the world, we need practices that produce a ton of food for us, right? However, this industrial farming practice has been extraordinarily terrible for soil degradation, depleting or polluting water. Remember, in the past couple of weeks, we've talked about groundwater and groundwater pollution. So this is another way that our groundwater resources can be polluted. There's also a shrinking of genetic storehouses of crop and animal varieties. Basically, there's just less variation, and we know that a lot of variation is a good thing. Go back to our biodiversity set of videos for a refresher on that idea. So these are these industrial size, large scale farming practices. Whereas sustainable agriculture are farming methods that can be used indefinitely because they do not deplete the resources faster than which they are being replaced. So this also kind of goes back to that the term sustainable that we encountered in our first couple of weeks of classes, right? So making sure that we're not using things before we're depleting all of them. So it's kind of an interesting thing here. So just make sure that you understand the differences between those two practices. So sustainable agriculture, by the way, can actually be large or smaller scale. There are ways that we can scale things up to be sustainable. It just kind of depends on, of course, the area, what you're farming, etc. It also has to be economically viable. It has to be good for the economy, right? We're a capitalist society. It's just what it is. And so for a region or for a like part of society to be economically viable, it has to be making money, basically. It also has to be socially ethical. And that means that workers are paid a fair wage, and it fits the needs of local communities, and those needs are considered within that farming region. In my opinion, this is the one that can get a little bit dicey, and this, of course, can vary from state to state, from location to location. You can say that workers are being paid fairly. If they're being paid fairly, that's fine, but are they being treated fairly? Are they still having to like handpick things and work for 10, 12, 14 hours without water in the sun? You know, those are things to also consider as well. And I don't think that those are nearly as enforced as things like buying organic, which will be on the next slide. And then the humane treatment of animals is also another goal, and that is a very interesting distinction of that it's a goal for sustainable agriculture to reach towards. It's not something that's like really actively being practiced for all sustainable farms, right? So things to consider there. And, you know, people have opinions on what's ethical and what's not ethical, so there is that. Last topic I want to cover for this particular video is going into this idea of, is organic good or is it not good? And so one of your assignments actually for this week is to look into how much more expensive it is to buy organic versus non-organic. Not everybody has the same monetary resources as everybody else does, right? So it might be more viable for someone maybe who's lower income or maybe, you know, fallen on some rough times. It may just not be, they can't afford to buy organic for everything, right? So making organic produce more accessible for more people would be a nice way to try to a goal to work towards, I guess. But regardless of that, what does organic mean? I think it's a word that's been kind of tossed around a lot, so I want to make sure that we really understand what this term means, especially in regards to sustainable agriculture. So to be organic means that it's farming that does not use synthetic fertilizer, pesticides, GMOs, or other chemical additives like hormones. So I want to touch on this one for a second, because GMOs, I feel like this term gets thrown around a lot as like a big bad term, when in fact, almost everything that you've eaten has been genetically modified. Cats and dogs are genetically modified, right? So it's not all bad. I just think people get all like, up in arms when you mention, oh, we made this in a lab or something like that, or things were crossbred. If you enjoy drinking wine, that's genetically modified, that's cloned, that's like brought in with other plants, like that's a thing. And then chemical additives like hormones, I think this is a topic that's being more talked about currently. If you are buying dairy or you're buying chicken or beef or whatever, like, are hormones added? I think there was a thing with like Chick-fil-A recently, that they're gonna no longer use hormone-free chickens or something like that. I don't really know. I don't eat chicken anyway, so that doesn't really apply to me. But I thought that was kind of interesting. That's like things that are popping up, little headlines are popping up around media and social media. So I also want to iterate that being organic does not mean that it's chemical free or pesticide free. I feel like even I'm guilty of this, thinking like, oh, it's organic, sweet. That means there's no chemicals or no pesticides. That's not entirely true. It's whether or not it's synthetic, which means like not naturally made. So that's kind of a thing there. To go organic or to farm organically, that tends to mean that there's lower short-term yields, so less crops are being produced, and really high labor costs because you have to do like all these extra little steps to make sure that everything is good and organic. And I also looked into the process of being certified to be organic. It's very expensive. It can cost anywhere from hundreds to thousands of dollars. It's a very lengthy process to get certified. You have to have inspectors come out and certification people come out, two different things I learned. And you have to renew this process every single year. So honestly, there might be some farms that like don't even find the worth of being certified organic, even though it's like, even if they are practicing organically, for them to be USDA certified, they have to jump through all these hoops and go through all this red tape, which I see the benefit of, you know what I mean? Like, I get why those things are there so that we have these standards and like bottom lines and no one can like slip through those cracks. But still, it can make it inaccessible for some maybe smaller scale farms, or farms that don't have enough money yet, or if they don't have subsidies or investors, like they just don't have those resources, and so it can make it harder for some of the smaller farmers out there. Anyways, but generally speaking, consumers can be willing to spend more money, and generally the products will taste better because they've been taken care of better. Like, I'm not sure if anyone here has ever grown your own food or like raised your own animals to slaughter. Like the love and care that you put into them really comes back to you if you are lucky enough to be able to harvest and consume what you've grown, and you can really taste the difference, I think, anyway, at least in my experiences. So there's that. Not all the time. I mean, maybe even some consumers would be willing to pay more, but they don't have more, you know what I mean? So that can be kind of a dicey thing as well. It's not as accessible for lower income folks or folks who have fallen on hard times, or it may not be accessible, like there's no organic produce in their grocery stores, or a smaller availability of organic foods in grocery stores. So there's kind of a lot, I think, to consider when we're considering this argument between organic v non-organic, sustainable v non-sustainable. Like, what are ways that we can make this more accessible for everybody, not just here in the United States, but for around the world? And like, why does it have to be such an expensive and lengthy process to be certified organic? You know, things like that, that I think are kind of interesting. And when I was talking to my dad, I asked him if his farms are organic. He said no, because he uses synthetic fertilizers. But he doesn't even like care or practice to consume organic or non-organic materials. He's also like old school boomer, so that doesn't surprise me, frankly. But it's kind of interesting, I think, sort of like the variations perhaps between the generations in this conversation. Anyway, so I encourage you to maybe even do a little further deep dive on what it takes to become a certified organic farm, on like large scale, so like USDA, or maybe smaller scale like the state of California. And one of your assignments this week, as I mentioned before, is to investigate some of these differences between organic and non-organic produce that maybe you consume, whether it be daily, weekly, or monthly, and to kind of compare and contrast the variation there. So that's kind of our stepping our toes into sustainability, into sustainable agriculture. We'll go a bit further into some of the nitty-gritty details of some of the different types of farming and importances of something called soil. So thank you so much for watching the first video.